Years ago, a friend of mine who's in his mid-90s, he was maybe in his early 90s or late 80s at the time, knowing of my interest in Buddhism and my Buddhist practices that I regularly aspire towards. He also knew that when I was an undergraduate at Youngstown State University that my major was psychology, and I had the incredible blessing and opportunity to study under a great teacher, the late Dr. Peter Beckett. And I studied perceptual psych as an undergrad and was involved in doing experiments. There was no grad program in psychology at YSU, so I was able to work with the professor rather closely. And even as an undergrad. And my friend, who's in his 90s, said, I can't think of a better preparation for your later interest in Buddhism than the study of perception. And I think of the words of the Buddha, where he said, wherever there is perception, there is deception. I've oftentimes spoken here of point of view. We speak of it all the time. What's your point of view? And recognizing that even though you may be watching in another part of the country or another part of the world, you actually have a point of view which allows you to see things in this room that I cannot. Namely, what's behind me. We each have a point from which we view. And I think the sacred texts invite us into having, or at least trying to expand toward a wider view. I was noticing in the reading from John today, that story begins with the disciples saying to Jesus, oh, here's this blind guy. What sin has he committed? What sin have his parents committed that caused him to be blind? And to put it in common vernacular, she says, no. That's not it. Even there, we have Jesus starting to heal the blindness in his disciples. And then in the reading from Tibetan Buddhism that Ollie shared with us, the invitation into the view, where our thoughts and emotions can become like writing on water. I love that, right? Imagine, taking your finger, going to the pond or going to the pool and write your name on the water. There's something there, but it immediately goes out and disappears. I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say that many times in my life, and sadly, I'm sure I could come up with an example from the last couple of days, but throughout my life, I'll get caught in some thought or some emotion, and it is all-consuming. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened, or what am I going to do about this and such? And it's so hard to let go of it, right? I can't even hardly notice the dog or my spouse or my family or my friends or the trees. I'm just caught in this thought. I'm caught in this emotion. I can't perceive the rest. Where are those thoughts right now? What happened to those emotions? riding on water. I remember a friend of mine saying, I have years ago lost friendships over ideas and dogmas that I don't even believe anymore. I mentioned earlier that we were at the funeral of my Aunt Eleanor, the last of my aunts and uncles. I've had 18 of them, I think, pass in my lifetime. And she died just a few weeks ago, and then they had the funeral on Friday. And I found myself seeing things about her. I've known her since I was born. But I found myself seeing anew. I've appreciated my Aunt Eleanor. I love my Aunt Eleanor. But I found myself seeing new facets. And seeing ways that she had impacted me and my children. Our non-separateness. The poet William Blake said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to us as it is. Infinite. I invite you to close your eyes and breathe in. And out. In. And out. In. And out. Ali led us in a beautiful practice today, inviting us to pause before that in-breath and before that out-breath. And there's something within me that wants to breathe in or wants to breathe out. In Jewish tradition, the breath is called ruah, which means spirit. And I thought, oh, this is another dimension of that. I just got DNA test results back, and my wife and children, a couple of years ago, they learned that they have small percentages that they are part African American and indigenous Native American, very small percentages. And we have to be careful with this, right? Because we don't want to be, obviously we're white folks and we have all that privilege and we're not, trying to claim this sort of stuff. At the same time, just in our hearts, it's lovely to think that this is part of who we are. You cannot pull that out. I cannot pull out Aunt Eleanor, and you cannot pull out some ancestor, even if they were 7 or 9 or 15 generations or 30 generations back. I did this DNA stuff and found that I have, I think it's 0.2% Jewish. And I thought, oh, lovely. The complexity. That which we don't see. I invited us into an exercise, if you were here with us at the beginning, where we envisioned ourselves as our 14-year-old selves and our 101-year-old self. I invite you into that again. I invite you to breathe in being that 14-year-old. Breathe out as that 101-year-old. Let that 101-year-old breathe in. Let that 14-year-old breathe out. Let that 14-year-old breathe in. Let that 101-year-old breathe out. Thich Nhat Hanh, in the reading we shared today, speaks of no death, no birth. I spoke of age 14 and age 101, but the reality is that elements of you were here decades, centuries, millennia before you were here in this manifestation. And that pieces of you will continue. The Roman Catholic priest, and I may mispronounce his name, I apologize for that, Jake Emperor, he speaks of breaking the imperialism of the one-dimensional meaning. I love that phrase because I think sometimes when we read our Judeo-Christian Bible, we tend to think, okay, what's the one right meaning? And we could talk about this Bible story with Jesus, and I love the fact that he is taking the mud, taking Mother Earth, and that's part of the work with his saliva in terms of the healing of this man. Just as I love Ollie's sharing of the breath, and that breath that we're breathing in the same air as our pets, as our ancestors, as the dinosaurs, that we are so deeply spiritually connected to this earth in so many lovely ways. And I don't know, perhaps Jesus was able to do something and this man physically could not see and now could. But I want to invite you to think in terms of blindness in another way today. And yet also I'm going to still touch upon miracle. I'm going to still touch upon miracle because that's part of the gift of, as Father Emperor says, moving beyond the one-dimensional. I invite you to think of a person, whoever pops into your head, a friend, family member, neighbor. Picture them. Hopefully you have someone in mind. I have a friend in mind. Now picture them at age 14. Now picture them at age 101. Now picture some aunt of theirs, and if they didn't have an aunt, maybe a woman in the community. Of course, you could pick an uncle or a man, but we'll just go with aunt right now, who was an influence on them. Imagine that person. Perhaps you've met them, perhaps you never have. And know that they are not separate. Take this person you're imagining, and let's go back to the 1850s. And picture some person walking down the street somewhere in the world in the 1850s, one of the ancestors of that person. Go back to medieval times and picture somebody, some ancestor of this person. Picture a tree nearby that person and it's letting go its oxygen. It's not separate from that person. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as it is. Infinite. A closing story about blindness. Several years ago, there was a person who said some nasty things about me. And they made sure that a lot of people heard these things. And I probably deserve to have some nasty things said about me once in a while. I've not been a perfect human being. I've done this or that or whatever. But this person didn't know me. They were a friend of a friend. Why were they doing this to me? I was so upset. I had maybe met this person once or twice at a party. I didn't know them. Why are they attacking me? Why are they making me suffer? We were once at some public event, and my wife Ollie said, "Oh, you know that person? She's there." I'm like, "Where?" I wanted to go up and give her a piece of my mind. And I can't recall exactly, but I think my wife was like, "I'm not going to tell you exactly which one it was." Because she knew I would go up and give a piece of my mind, and it wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. Why would this person do this to me? What? Evil! It's terrible! Well, over a course of time, I learned a little bit about this person. Not a lot, just a little bit about some of their circumstances, some of their little pieces to their life that weren't so pleasant, maybe. And then I was in a mindfulness group, actually one of our Sacred Ground men's mindfulness groups. And for whatever reason, on this particular day, years later, I started thinking about this person. And I started sharing about them. And I said, I remembered what Thich Nhat Hanh had said. When someone makes you suffer, they're saturated with suffering. And I said, oh my gosh, the level of suffering within that person, that she would make me almost a total stranger, really. I don't even know her name to this day. That she would make me or attempt to hurt me. She doesn't even know me. She must be hurting so much that her suffering's spilling out, not just at somebody in retribution for what they did before, but somebody she doesn't even know. And it really, and you know, let's not put Michael on a pedestal here, because I was ready to like lay into her, 6 months before and angry and everything else. But in this moment, for whatever reason, something opened in me and I was like, oh my goodness. I can't imagine the level of suffering that must be in her. And tears were flowing. And maybe that's part of the blindness that Jesus wants to heal in us. Or the Buddha wants to heal in us. And the miracle. Less than 2 weeks later, might have been a week later. This is now years later, since these insulting things have happened, and I received an email from this person. Apologizing. saying that what she had done to me was not fair. She was going through a really rough time. There's confidentiality in that men's group. No one there, I don't think anyone there knew her. I didn't know her name. I didn't mention her by name. But I wonder when, and I don't live there. I don't live there with the view. I maybe have been fortunate enough, blessed enough that occasionally I've been able to touch it for a couple of moments. But I wonder if, when we open those doors of perception, when we start to see the infinite complexity, when we start to see how the thoughts and emotions are just flowing by, this person who seems to be this solid entity is made of all this else. I wonder if when we start to see that, when we start to move beyond the one-dimensional, I wonder if the Great Sacred just uses that sometimes as opportunities to open us to the magic and to the miracles. Maybe. I invite you to enjoy the sound of the bell.